Hi, it's Jacob. In case you haven't heard, I just launched a brand new podcast with my wife, Blake, which is all about how to be your own boss. It's called the BYOB Podcast. Together, we have over 2 decades of entrepreneurial experience, and we are both 7-figure entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, parents, and partners in everything we do. If you want to learn how to be your own boss, check it out at byobpodcast.com or take our quiz to see if you have what it takes to be an entrepreneur at beyourownbossquiz.com. Make sure to follow me on Spotify or subscribe to the show on your favorite platform. You can do so easily by going to futureofworkpodcast.com. And lastly, please do me a favor, rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred platform is. It really helps spread the word about the show, and I personally appreciate it.
So we decided to write this book really to help reinforce our viewpoint, my viewpoint, and I think the viewpoint of a lot of people today, that the notion that, that business needs to focus on one thing, and that's the bottom line, and everything else is, you pay some homage to it, but not much. I think that we've proven that, if you have a set of values that speak to all of your stakeholders, profitability, yes, but your associates, who you're serving, in our case, fans, guests, or customers, and the communities in which we operate and live, that holistic formula for success and a winning model is really the answer to sustained profitability in the broad sense of the word profitability, of making a difference during the time we have on planet Earth.
That is Arthur Blank, the co-founder of the Home Depot, which today has a market capitalization of over $300 billion and employs over 400,000 people. Arthur is also the author of the new book, Good Company, which comes out on September 15th. Arthur has been named one of the world's 100 greatest living business minds by Forbes in 2017, Executive of the Year in 2018 by Sports Business Journal, and one of the 50 most influential people in sports in 2016, 2017, and 2018 by Sports Business Journal. Arthur owns the Atlanta Falcons NFL team and the Atlanta United soccer team. His family businesses also include the nationwide PGA Tour Superstore, 3 ranches in Montana, and Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which hosted the 2019 Super Bowl. Under his leadership, the Home Depot was voted America's most socially responsible company in 2001, and it grew exponentially over the years while competitors struggled. Today we are talking about the values that he instilled in the company that made that possible. You will also hear how he and co-founder Bernie Marcus started the Home Depot after they were fired from another home improvement store, and how they outperformed companies that had been around for decades. Arthur has some great stories of how he leads by example, and he shares some of those in our conversation today as well.
Every Wednesday night, after we get riding down there, after we have dinner, I roll up my sleeves, and I serve pie to 150, 125 people. And I'm happy to do it. And they say, yeah, he's the owner. My God, what's he doing serving pie to us? Well, it's another way for me to send a message to our associates that are there and to the guests that we have there that no job is beneath me, that I'm there with them. I'm side by side with them.
The world is changing quickly. What do you need to know and do in order to be successful now and in the future? From leadership to the future of work to employee experience, this show will give you the insights and the tools you need to succeed and thrive professionally and personally. Make sure to follow me on Spotify or subscribe to the show on your favorite platform. You can do so easily by going to futureofworkpodcast.com. Also, please rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred platform is. It really helps spread the word about the show, and I personally appreciate it. Welcome everyone to another episode of The Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. My guest today is Arthur Blank, co-founder of the Home Depot and author of the brand new book called Good Company. Arthur, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Jacob. It's good to be with you and your listeners.
And I had the opportunity to go through your book, which was fascinating. I mean, the stories that you have in there are really amazing, and we're going to get to all those. But why don't we start with just some background information about you? So how you grew up, where did you grow up? How did you get to become the co-founder of the Home Depot?
Boy. You probably don't have enough time for all of that, Jacob, but I try to give you the condensed version of it. I grew up in Queens, New York City, and my father ran a small drugstore, or helped run a small drugstore. It was actually owned by his brother. I lost my dad when I was 15. He was 44. My mother, he had started his own business, a wholesale pharmaceutical business to doctors and hospitals and drugstores across the country. And he passed away. My mother, at age 37, stepped into that business, had no business background, but she ran that business successfully. It was sold to a large conglomerate called Dalen. And during the interim period of time, I'd gone to college, went to Babson College, which is a small business school outside of Boston. Came out, worked for one of the big seven at that time, Arthur Young and Company, and became a CPA in New York and elsewhere since. And so I worked in our family business for about 3 years or so, and then it was sold to Dalen. And went to the South, was running a chain of drugstores for Dalen called Elliott's Cut Rate Drugstores and Stripe Discount Stores. And it was part of a big company. The big company was not doing well. They decided they didn't have the funding to continue our expansion, which was pretty rapid then. And my partner at HD, Bernie Marcus, was running all of their discount stores, and later had moved to LA, running their home improvement center company, Handy Dan Home Improvement Centers. And so I told him I was going to leave because I wasn't interested at age 20. I think it was 21 then or 23. I was very young then, really young. I was graduated, finished college in 3 years, so I was way ahead of my time, really. But in any event, so Bernie and I went to California, worked with Bernie at Handy Dan rather than leave. I'd gotten to know him through our national meetings that we had with all these businesses, and we always enjoyed working together, had a similar view of business and the world in a lot of ways. We both got fired in 1978, which was a long story. In our first book, Built from Scratch, that Bernie and I did together, we talk about that. This book really has to do with, our value set, our 6 core values, and ones that originally were developed at HD and now translated and transposed into all of these operating businesses we have that are in very diverse environments, very diverse industries, and very diverse geographies, and how they've all worked very successfully as they still do today at the Home Depot. So when we got fired in '78, I decided what do I really want to do, and Bernie and I both decided we would start a home improvement center company, one that we could not have competed with, although the one we were running was very successful, and that was a large warehouse, no frills, down market store, low prices, great services, etc. Hence the Home Depot. And that was started in 1979. I was there for 23 years. Bernie stayed on another couple of years after me, probably 25 years. We both essentially departed really at the same time. I physically left earlier. He moved upstairs, if you will, a couple of years earlier, and then left soon after that. So when I left, I felt like, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And, I've always loved sports. I've always loved, variety of businesses. And each one has a different story behind it, but we're now cobbled together a group of businesses that are incredible. We own the Atlanta Falcons, part of the National Football League, and very successful franchise today, Atlanta United, which has broken every attendance record in the history of Major League Soccer, which is all North America. We operate our PGA Tour Superstores, which is the most successful golf specialty retail store in the world today. We operate a number of ranches out in Montana, and one open to the public is it's called Mountain Sky, and it's the highest graded dude ranch in the West today. And we have a group of associate-led foundations, and we have, of course, our big family foundation, which does work throughout the United States and primarily in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, and Montana, but really throughout the United States and to some degree internationally as well.
It's really amazing, yeah.
That's a very, very long story. In between, I've got, 6 great kids. You name an age, I have a child, and 6 grandchildren. And so we decided to write this book really to help reinforce our viewpoint, my viewpoint, and I think the viewpoint of a lot of people today, that the notion that, that business needs to focus on one thing, and that's the bottom line, and everything else is, you pay some homage to it, but not much. I think that we've proven that, if you have a set of values that speak to all of your stakeholders, profitability, yes, but your associates who you're serving, in our case, fans, guests, or customers, and the communities in which we operate and live, that holistic formula for success and a winning model is really the answer to sustained profitability in the broad sense of the word profitability, of making a difference during the time we have on planet Earth. And we find today with a lot of millennials, Jacob, I mean, I think you're a relatively young man yourself, as I remember.
Yes, I'm barely in the millennial category by like 1 or 2 years.
But I mean, they're not they're asking and pushing with a sense of urgency today. With why am I here? What's the purpose of life? Where I go to quote work, play every day. How is that connected to making a difference in the lives of not only myself and my immediate family, but how is it making a difference in the lives of other people throughout humanity? And I think that, as John Lewis, who just passed away recently, was a good friend, John Lewis would call it, I'm in good trouble. Our young people today, our young millennials are creating some good trouble, pressing for answers on relationships, associations with entities they're involved with, and with community, and with social questions and civil questions, and questions of equality that they have a sense of urgency about today.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And today, I think last I checked, Home Depot has a market cap of over $300 billion, over 400,000 employees, and is number 26 on the Fortune 500. So it's completely mind blowing to think of how you started this company so many decades ago, and it's now one of the largest and most recognized companies on planet Earth. And so I wanted to kind of go back a couple of years when you first started the company.
Yep.
I mean, what was like? So you had this idea, you knew you wanted to do it, and what was the process like? Did you buy one store and then start there? Like, how did you go from the two of you guys to 400,000 people?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. It was interesting. I went to a conference many years ago when Sam Walton, who was the founder of Walmart, was alive, and Sam was the conference speaker. And at lunch, he was taking questions, and somebody asked him, I think they had reached their first $10 billion mark. And so they asked him, well, today I don't even know what, you would know what the volume of Walmart is today. God knows, probably half the earth. But, Sam said we just opened one store at a time, and they just added up to whatever they added up to. So, I would say that in the case of Home Depot, we started out with the 4 stores in Atlanta. We made sure that model worked. So we sat on those 4 stores and constantly refined the model for basically by listening to the customer and responding to what they were telling us, what was good, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they want to see more of and less of, assortment-wise, services-wise, hours-wise, things of that nature. And then in September of '81, we went public, and we opened up 4 stores in South Florida. And I think one of the interesting things that took place then, right before that September, probably in August, I had lunch with a gentleman who was one of the executive vice presidents for Goldman Sachs, one of the senior partners. His name was Joe Ellis, and Joe said to me, we studied your business in Atlanta, and it's incredibly successful, but you realize that the chance of you being able to export this business elsewhere is going to be very limited. I mean, your culture is it's such a powerful part of this formula that your ability to sustain it and grow it is going to be very difficult. So I thought about it for a couple of weeks, and I sat down with Bernie one day at lunch, and I said, Bernie, I had lunch with Joe a few weeks ago, Joe Ellis, and I mean, he was one of the kings of Wall Street at that time, and we were just, 4-store startup company, et cetera, et cetera. And he said he doesn't think that we can be as successful elsewhere because our culture was so unique in Atlanta, and there was no way we could bring that culture to another market that far away. So I said, I've been thinking about it, for a couple of weeks, and I will tell you the conclusion I've come to is the only way we can do this, because I basically agree the culture it wasn't really so much the products or the pricing, the assortment, all of that was terribly important, but the underpinnings for all of what we did was this culture that was unique. That the only way we can do that is if we begin promoting people based on culture first. Not could they literally just write it down and make a list, et cetera, but do they live it? Are they ambassadors for it? Do they represent our values day in, day out? And if the answer was yes to those questions, they were ready to be promoted as a store manager, a district manager, or whatever it may be. So that principle of understanding that succession planning was going to be based off of culture and understanding these values and living them, being able to demonstrate that kind of leadership, I think is really what sustained the growth of HD. And I think today, if you went to a shareholders meeting, Jacob, you would find out today, and I try to go every year. This year virtually, so I didn't go, but every year the meeting starts out, and the gentleman running the company today, Craig Manier, I hired probably 30 years ago, is a great guy. He's a chairman, CEO, and president of the company today. Start out with the same thing. They have an inverted pyramid up on a board, which shows the customers on top and Craig Manier at the very bottom, being in a servant leader role. That used to be myself and Bernie, but the customers are always on top, followed by our frontline associates. And then adjoining that, right adjacent to it, is a values wheel. And that values wheel is the same values wheel that we've used and applied to all these businesses today. And the beauty of the book is that you would think about, well, those values, they work at Home Depot because you started them there, and we understand the retail business, et cetera, is that they work in a stadium, they work for a football team, they work for a soccer team, they work for a golf retailer, they work for guest ranches, they work for a foundation. So the same values work identically in all of these different kinds of institutions, producing the kinds of successes that we want with associates who really understand these values and live them.
Yeah.
So, that's the beauty of the story and the beauty of the message behind the book, I think.
I was reading that the first stores were actually built in spaces that you leased from J.C. Penney in, I think it was 1979. And it's fascinating because I would imagine in the 70s and 80s you had a lot of competition. I mean, Lowe's was around, you guys were around. I mean, there were a lot of these types of stores that were there. And right. A lot of these organizations have disappeared. There was no more J.C. Penney, there's no more Kmart, there's no more Sears. What did you guys do that allowed you to survive, and not just survive, but I mean, you guys are even to this day.
I think what we did is that we kind of reinvented the industry. When Bernie and I left Handy Dan under the umbrella of this, firing in 1978, we both had a lot of opportunities corporate-wise to do a variety of different things, run different businesses or whatever it may be. But we had great self-confidence, and we loved the industry. We loved the home improvement center industry, but we had said to ourselves, even though Handy Dan Home Improvement Centers, which was the name of the company, was the most successful home improvement center company in America at that time, we said, if we ever had to compete with a large, no-frills, down-market, big box store with great low pricing, assortment, services, service levels, et cetera, we never could have done it. So if we said we were the best in the country, when we were operating pretty much throughout the United States, primarily Sun Belt, but pretty much the country, we said we couldn't have done it. So I said, let's reinvent that. Let's start that. So we leapfrogged the industry by 7 or 8 years. And because we were private, for the 2 years between 79 and 81, we would have competitors from Lowe's and every other competitor across the country, and there were many, many, many others that were very successful. They would come in and visit our stores, and they wouldn't see the numbers, but they'd see the traffic, and they would see the amount of inventory, and the stories behind that too, but we don't have time for all those. But they would see the amount of inventory, the amount of people, the level of service we were committed to, et cetera, and they would say, these dumb jerks, I'm using a nice word now because it's not the word that they use, but these dumb jerks are going to go broke. They invested too much in space, too much in inventory, too much in people, and they're going to go broke. When we became public in 81 and we had to release our numbers to sell stock, people were amazed at what we were doing. And then the debate came, well, with us as a local competitor, whether it be in the Southeast, Southwest, any place in the country, can we sustain ourselves against this organization? And they believed that because customers had shopped with them for many, many years, and they had a committed clientele, that they would just continue to shop with them regardless of who was there. But reality was, when you show the proper respect and humility to who you're serving, the customers in this case, and understood that, they wanted the best assortments and the best prices and the best value for their hard-earned dollars, that their loyalty would move in a direction that was most responsive to that. So every marketplace we went to, we would do our thing. Competitors would continue to do the same things they had done for 50, 100, 150 years in some cases. They would be out of business and people would shop in our stores. And, the rest of it is self-explanatory. But, Lowe's, to their credit, for many years did the same thing. Then finally, under one of their CEOs, and I'm trying to think of which one it was, it's not important right now, but under one of the CEOs, they said, we really cannot beat these guys at the old game. If we're going to compete with them, we're going to have stores that are similarly sized and what have you. And so that's what they've committed to over the years.
It's interesting because they actually had a head start, right? I mean, I read that they were founded, I think it's almost 100 years ago now. Mm-hmm. So they had several decades head start on you, right. And still you came into the game later and just kind of pretty much.
Well, what they had done, Jacob, was continue to operate their stores the same way they always did. They hadn't changed them, and that model was okay. It wasn't a bad model; it was okay. But as an entrepreneur, if you will, we're thinking about, well, what is it that customers really want beyond what they're currently seeing in the marketplace? And it was more assortments. It was lower prices, it was higher levels of service, which most people, most operators, most competitors viewed that, that compilation of commitments as being too expensive, too costly. Yeah. What they didn't know is that our sales per square foot would end up being double, triple, quadruple what everybody else was in the nation. So, but behind all of that, the most important ingredient was the level of service we had in our stores. And a brief story I can tell you, which we talk about in more detail in the book, is that the gentleman who's the CEO at Lowe's, when I was running HD as a CEO at that point in my career, I'd retired and he had retired, and I was over in Augusta as a guest of somebody playing some golf, and he left a note for me. He said, "If you're around, I'll be on the putting green. Come over and say hello, etc." I said, "Fine." I did that, and he said to me, "We visited 200 of your stores a year." 200 a year, United States and Canada. And at that point, we had stores in Mexico and Chile as well. And we went to see those stores too. And there were a couple of things that were amazing to us. One was that every store we went to, no matter who we spoke to, whether it be a cashier or a lot engineer or a store manager or a merchant, anybody we could talk to, they all understood your philosophy. They all understood the values of the business and the consistency. And we could never copy that in all of our stores. So even though we had stores that were the same size and products were similar and pricing was somewhat similar, we didn't understand the kind of commitment you had to customer service. And so that part of our culture of listening and responding, put people first and including everybody and innovate on a continuous basis and leading by example and community involvement, giving back to others, all those 6 core values, they didn't really understand them. They were just observers of them. And the result is that their sales per square foot, which you understand as a businessman and retailing, is a big generator of profits. Ours is twice theirs and is still twice theirs. because we understood what what commitment made to those core values and what commitment made to customer service, which they really in their hearts, and they could observe it and they could know it, but they didn't really know it where it mattered the most, where they were making decisions, making investment decisions, and making operating decisions that were just in conflict to that.
Can you, and this is a little bit not directly related to this, but in the book you talk about a story that happened, I think when you were 10 years old, about a robber. Can you share that story?
Yeah, you're going back in time, Jacob. But
yes.
Yeah, I was probably about 10 years old. My father, as I said earlier, was a pharmacist. He worked for his brother. His brother owned the drugstore. It's called O's Pharmacy. It was in Sunnyside. Small drugstore, conventional drugstore, et cetera. And on the weekend, my brother and I, we'd live in a one-bedroom apartment, and the apartment door wasn't really locked. I mean, kids used to come and go all the time. And so my father, the doorbell rang. He went to the door. He opened it up. There were three men there. They knocked him down. I remember hearing we had bikes. The bikes fell in the foyer where my mother and father used to sleep. And went in there, and there was a guy standing over my father with a gun to his head. And he said, we want the money. He said, well, we don't have any money. He said, well, I know you own the drugstore, and you take home the cash every night. At that time, I know this is like foreign language to most people. That much business was done in cash, and you would take it home, for the weekend versus actually depositing it. But that's the way business was often done then. In any event. So he said, look, my brother owns a drugstore. I'm a pharmacist. I work for my brother. We don't have any cash here in the house. Whatever I have, you're welcome to have. I have my wife here and two boys here, et cetera. And I said, well, we don't believe you. We're going to search the house. Fine. They searched the house. They put my mother and myself and my brother in the one non-bedroom we had, which was a family room, living room, whatever you want to call it, kind of thing. And one guy was sitting there with a gun in his lap, and my mother was giving him. This is one of the areas where I got principle from in my life. My mother was, and she was, Lordy, she was in her early 30s then. She was giving this guy a lecture on what he was doing was really not right. It wasn't going to be a productive career path for him. He was going to end up in a bad place, and they really should rethink their purpose in life and all of this kind of stuff. The guy's got to get, and finally he turns around, mother, he said, would you please shut up? So I don't think she did, but at that point they took me, put me in the bathtub, tied my hands, my legs, put some tape over my mouth. After I called him a couple of names, and I remember one of the robbers said to me, if I tell your mother what you just said to me, you're going to get your mouth washed out with soap. So, but I was only 10 years old at the time, and I was using every bit of profanity that I knew, which was, whatever it was at 10 years old. And they left, and I was the first one to get out of the tub, and, I was a wiry kid, and I was able to get my hands untied, and, we couldn't call the police because the phone lines had been cut, but finally they came, and they finally found the people, I don't know, several weeks later, but it was a story in living, in this case with my mother, who had incredible principle, and she wasn't going to back off or back down from anybody, no matter, whether they had a gun in their lap or otherwise. She was going to tell them what was right and what was wrong from her viewpoint.
And how did you bring that principle into your leadership style, whether it was inside of Home Depot or your sports teams or any of the different businesses that you have? Is that something that carried with you?
Yeah, I think so. I would say in this way that, you're faced with difficult circumstances, I think, all the time. A lot of times they're not always difficult. A lot of times they're just, joyous decisions between two win situations. But, for instance, during this COVID period of time, during the pandemic, during the resulting effect on our economy and social unrest and everything we're all dealing with in the year 2020, which will put a big eraser to in the future. I think you have some tough decisions to make, and so you rely on those core values. And my mother was always a very principled person. The evidence that day was, giving a lecture to this guy who, was sitting there with a loaded pistol and would only hear so much of it before he just told her to shut up. And as I remember, she probably kept talking anyway. So, I think, the whole notion of principle mattering, speaking up, saying what's on your mind, doing the right things for the right reasons. My mother had an expression: do the right things for the right reasons and live with the consequences. I think that, this is one of these values that I mentioned earlier. So, it's living a life that's based on values, decision-making based on values, living a life that has purpose to it. So it's not a question of getting up in the morning and asking life, what can you do for me today? But life asks us, what can we do? What are the opportunities that you're taking advantage of to make a difference in the lives of other people? And I think younger people today, thank heavens, are asking that question more and more. I'm born, I have an opportunity. What do I do with my life in business or otherwise, and business and otherwise, to make a difference in the world?
If you were to walk into a company nowadays, big corporate organization, maybe something the size of Home Depot or a little bit smaller, do you think you would be able to spot who the good leaders are and who the bad leaders are? And if so, what would you look for to identify a good versus a bad leader?
It's a really good question. I think because I get asked, and I think, Jacob, you probably get asked a good bit too, given your background, from younger people. Well, I'm graduating college. What should I do? And all that. And I tell people this. I tell young people the same thing. I tell my kids the same thing. So find your passion, find what your interest is, whatever that may be. Everybody's different in that regard, or forms of different. And then find, an industry, and most importantly, find a company in that industry, an organization, an institution in that industry that represents your values, that connects with your spirit and who you are and what you're about and what you care about. So then you're connecting, your work and making it kind of work play, like this Zen philosophy of what we should be doing in life. And you connect it to an organization that's living with a purpose that matches your purpose. So I think, as opposed to running after a company that may have the best PE ratio, or the best opportunity for higher levels of profitability than anybody else in the industry. And, I'm not saying that's bad. That's a good thing. Obviously at HD we did it, and, many companies that we connect with, and we try to compete that way with our teams and our ranch and our golf business, et cetera, to be the very best of the best. But you want to connect with associates who really feel like, my time, my energy, and this expression that I've used over the years, which I put forward to our associates. I said, well, you have to ask yourself, is that, is this organization, is this institution, is our businesses, whatever segment of the business you're involved in, is it really worthy of your life? So sometimes people look at me like, what does that mean? So what it means is that, you're giving us 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, whatever it may be. You're working long hours. It takes a lot of commitment. You want to work with an organization, I don't want to say for, but with an organization that you feel really matches up to what your inner energy, inner passion is telling you is important in your life. And I think, our role of a servant leader and being connected to our fans, our guests, our customers, with our associates, and with the communities, and our philanthropy, 98% of my estate's going to be recycled back through the foundation. To our associates, that means a lot. They come home, they feel good about that. They walk in the door, their shoulders are back, their chest is out, and they feel proud of what they've done all day and why they've done it. So I think that kind of connection is really important today. Young people are much more demanding of that than I think we were when we were younger.
So as a leader, I suppose part of their responsibility is to help make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It's kind of follow up to the next question, but I suspect you kind of already answered it. And that is there something about leadership that you think most leaders today get wrong?
Get it wrong. Okay.
Yeah, something that a lot of leaders do, or that they.
I think the great leaders in their own businesses, their own industries, and I'm talking about in every manufacturers, service suppliers, institutions, financial institutions. One of my good friends who had read the book and made some comments in the back cover about it is Jamie Dimon, who runs J.P. Morgan Chase, largest financial institution in the world.
I was going to ask you about him too.
Yeah, well, Jamie has an incredible set of values. I try to recruit him. We talk about that in the book for probably 6 months. He came really close to being able to recruit him as my replacement.
It's my next question for you.
So yeah, but someone like Jamie, even a really big organization, Jamie has great values, very similar to the 6 core values we discussed in this book. It wouldn't be exactly the same, but very similar. And he demonstrates those every day in his role as a leader. So it's a big organization, worldwide, et cetera, but they understand that Jamie is going to lead based on the values that are built into, his core and what he's expressing through the businesses. And if they're going to be successful, they better understand them, they be able to live them, and be able to articulate them when they articulate by living them, by making them happen in any area of the business they're involved in. So I think that's what the great leaders do today. Ones that are not great leaders, they may send out a memo every other day reminding you to do this and this and this and next thing. But truth of the matter is their behavior every day doesn't reinforce it. And so I think great leaders, they walk the talk, they lead by example. And there are many examples in the book that I give of that, which I think is really important. It means rolling up your sleeve and walking the talk and leading by example. And when you do that, not only does it set the right pace for everybody in the organization, but it also brings ideas to you when you're on the front lines and you're walking in somebody else's footsteps, the footsteps of your frontline associates, regardless of the business. You see and feel and understand things that you wouldn't ordinarily. So that's something that you really can't replace by just reading about it. You have to go do it yourself to feel it.
You also have a section in your book where you talk about the marriage of purpose and profit. And it feels like a lot of leaders oftentimes assume that these two are mutually exclusive, meaning like you can only focus on purpose, not on purpose and profit. But at Home Depot, you found a way to make both of them a focus. What was the secret to doing that?
I think today, I would say that is being demanded. I mean, it was always something I think people wanted. I think the younger generation, the millennial generation, is absolutely demanding that in the marketplaces today. They want to be associated to companies that are very profitable because they want to be, sustainable. They want to make sure that, they're going to be around in the future, but also companies that, take time to focus on, who they're serving, on their associates, on their communities, on the suppliers, any stakeholders, et cetera. To wit, I think if you look at the Business Roundtable in 2019, actually under the guidance of Jamie Dimon, who's the chairman of that group, 192 of the largest corporations in America, they have changed their manifesto from we're here to give maximum return to shareholders, that we're here to do that, and at the same time, equally, to do all the other things that I just described. So I think, and that's where young people, that are looking for opportunities, that's where their head is today. That's where they're going. Who's living that authentically and who's just saying it? And the ones that are living authentically are going to attract and keep the best talent. At least I'm convinced that's so.
Oh, I'm convinced very much of the same thing. You mentioned Jamie Dimon, and I love the story that you talked about in the book. Can you go into a little bit more depth around how you tried to recruit Jamie Dimon and why he didn't end up becoming the CEO of Home Depot?
Well, Jamie, I met Jamie through actually Ken Langone, who was also one of the co-founders of the company. Really, he wasn't on the inside, but he was our financial, guru, if you will, investment banker for all the years that we were there. But I met him through Ken. Ken knew him from the banking world. He had worked with Sandy Lyle and a group of other people who had been successful. And he had left Shearson and left Sandy under some difficult circumstances, and he was available. And so I spent, 6 months, as I said earlier, trying to recruit him. He loved our business, and he loved our culture. He loved this six-wheel culture that we talk about in the book, and each one examples. And I mean, he felt even at Shearson, where he was working, that he lived a lot of those values as well. So he'd come to Atlanta. We'd go for a run every single day together. That's when I was running a lot, and Jamie was running then too. And I would take him to lunch at his favorite place. He loved Southern barbecue, and we'd have Southern barbecue, and he'd stay over the house, and my wife would, cook him a nice breakfast or whatever. And so we hung around together for 6 months and did whatever we could to bring him. And I think he was very close to joining us. But I think at the end of the day, Jamie said to himself and said to me, we had become really good friends and are today, that, I invested 17 years in financial institutions. And, although I do think the culture is very similar to what I believe in, it's a whole different world. And I would rather try to build on what I've already invested in for 17 years. And he's done an incredible job of that. So, He and his wife they're both really good friends. They have a lovely family, and Jamie represents, the kind of leader you'd want to work for if you're interested in that kind of financial institutional life.
Well, you mentioned these 6 values, which we actually didn't get a chance to touch on yet. So maybe we can spend a couple minutes just going over what those 6 values are.
Well, if you look at the value wheel, there, put people first and listen and respond, include everyone, innovate on a continuous basis, lead by example, and giving back to others. So the book talks about each one of these values and gives you examples, stories, examples of how they apply in all these different businesses and all these different settings, and how they're what is the foundation and the bedrock for all of these businesses, regardless of the environment that they're in. So you've read the book, or you've screened it, gone through it. Any of these you want to talk about, we can talk about. We can give you some examples. But if somebody's looking for, well, give me some. I mean, it's nice when you talk about it, but give me some real live examples of how this holistic people, profit, planet kind of approach to business today works. This is a great place to start, or a great place to add to your inventory of knowledge.
Yeah.
So I would encourage, not because I'm trying to sell books, but I'm trying to, share with other people the success we've had in being able to run a business that has these values, that demonstrate these values every day, gives back every day, and yet produces at very high levels in terms of profitability.
Well, let's start with one, because I know a lot of people who listen to the podcast are leaders in some capacity. Maybe they're entry level, or maybe they're more senior, but lead by example is one that I particularly liked.
Well, I'll give you one story about which I talk about a little bit in the book. It goes back to the days of HD. I could talk about current ones as well, but the one at HD, we for our listeners who may not know what a compactor is, it's what you use to take, you get all this corrugated material and inventory into a retail store, and take the inventory out, you put it on the shelves or display it or whatever it may be, and you have all this corrugated material. So there's a lot of air. And for whatever reason, because of a startup company and, we're doing things on the fly, and, we didn't get our compactors until like 2 weeks after we started to receive merchandise. And I was working in one of our stores, and I had my sleeves rolled up like everybody else. And when our compactor came in, our receiving areas in our store had gotten so congested with all this corrugated material that we literally couldn't receive any more merchandise. So I spent, 24 hours in the store, literally, running the compactor and compacting all this material. And, one of the guys went up to the store manager and said, there's this nut in the back. He's been here for 24 hours, hasn't left. He's compacting all this stuff so we can get more merchandise in to get up on the shelves. I mean, I don't know who he is, but you ought to consider him for a promotion at some time. So the manager said, by the way, he's one of our founders. So, that's an example of leading by example. And I'll give you just another one. It's kind of funny. In our stadium, Steve Cannon is our CEO of all of our for-profit businesses other than our ranches. And Steve was in the stadium, and he has this program, you walk in my shoes, which basically means you do the work of a frontline associate. So he was running a concession stand. And at the concession stand, the way the French fries were being packaged, and produced and sent down the delivery mechanism to the person who was given to the customer, about a third of the fries were falling out because the packaging wasn't done correctly. So Steve, obviously noticed that, and he went back. And we take great pride in our food and beverage because we do tremendous volumes. Our food and beverage pricing is at what we call street pricing, is half of what everybody else's is in America. So we do an incredible amount of volume in our stadium as a result of that. But we had to change the way the package was, and then all the fries that were being cooked and everything actually got delivered to the customer instead of half of them spilt in the conveying process. So, every business that I've been in, Home Depot is putting on an orange apron, walking the stores, talking to the customers, talking to the associates. When I go to our PGA Tour Superstore, walk around, talk to our customers. How are you being fitted? Is everything okay? You need anything? You want anything? And we don't, nobody's on commission. We're here to fit you with the best product that we can. And if you can't play like, Tiger Woods, we'll make sure you look like him. And we'll have all the apparel there to make sure that's the case, or whoever your favorite golfer is, male or female. So it's really, you lead by example, by understanding. I'll give you one more quick one. It happened last summer at our guest ranch that we were open. I was sitting in the bar at night and having a drink, and I heard there were guests were packed in their place and in the place, and I heard a couple of guests saying, the restroom around the corner is plugged up, it's not working. So I didn't call anybody. I went in there and I flushed it and fixed the commode, and then I went down to just check on one of the other commodes, and there was one other one that was also stuck up, and I fixed that one. I didn't tell him. I just went back and sat down. Well, the next day, the associates at the ranch were saying, "Do you know the owner was fixing commodes last night?" And and to me, it wasn't a big deal. I just, I didn't tell our guests because it's not important. But it's important for the associates to feel there was no job beneath me, no job beneath the leader, whoever it may be, that they roll up their sleeves. And the truth of the matter is, and this is the God's honest truth, Jacob, I used to come back to meetings at HD or in all of our businesses now, our ranches where I spend a good bit of time over the summer, with my family, et cetera, et cetera. And people will say to me, how is it you know so much about what's going on here and there and elsewhere? And the response is always the same, is that because I spend time, watching our fans, our guests, our customers. I spend time assisting. I spend time working. At the ranch, we do this dinner ride every Wednesday night, and we talk about it. We have a couple hundred quarter horses at our ranches, so dinner ride's a big deal. And we have a woman that's working for us for 29 years as a baker. She's famous throughout that area of Montana, truly, as a baker. But anyway, she makes like 20 different kinds of pies. Every Wednesday night, after we get riding down there, after we have dinner, I roll up my sleeves, and I serve pie to 150, 125 people. And I'm happy to do it. And they say, yeah, as the owner, my God, what's he doing serving pie to us? Well, it's another way for me to send a message to our associates that are there and to the guests that we have there that no job is beneath me, that I'm there with them. I'm side by side with them. Same reason in the fourth quarter of an NFL game, I go to the sidelines. I'm not with the coaches, not with the players. I'm between the goal line and the 35-yard line, safe territory. Don't talk to anybody, but they know that I'm there. They know that I'm with them, win or lose, that I'm with them. I'm standing down there with them. I'm not sucking on some drink up in my suite. So, that kind of identification, both from a learning standpoint and from a connection standpoint to our associates and to the people we're serving is really important. And the level of knowledge you accumulate by doing those kinds of things is irreplaceable.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the Mountain Sky website as we speak. I'm going to have to take my family out there.
You should. It's like I will tell you this, and I'm not bragging, just reality. So these values, you might say, well, it all sounds great. How do they translate into like real money? 96% of our guests at Mountain Sky, and the place is not inexpensive. It's priced competitively, but it's not inexpensive. 96% of our guests, before they leave the ranch after staying for a week, they sign up for the same cabin the same week the following year. 96%.
That's crazy.
So our marketing budget is zero because our word of mouth is 100%.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Well, I wanted to, I know we only have a couple minutes left, so instead of jumping into one of the other values, which people can learn about by grabbing the book, I wanted to jump into another story because it sounded like things were going very, very well at Home Depot. And then things started to go down a little bit as a new CEO took over. In the book, you talk about some of the challenges that were there. And I think the next CEO was Bob Nardelli, right?
Right, correct. Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about what happened there?
And I think the important part of that story, and I think that, Frank Blake, who took over for Nardelli, and Craig Manier, who took over for Frank, and both Bernie and myself would say the same thing. It's a really good example how one person, even with, it was 250,000 associates when I left the company, how one person can make a difference, particularly one person in a point of a CEO or a leadership position. So Bob began to make decisions that would counter our culture. I mean, Bob made a whole bunch of decisions that would increase our profitability short term, but would diminish our values on a long-term basis.
Can you give an example of one such decision?
Sure. I'll give an example. So an example was we put the level of training, we treated our part-time people the same as the full-time people in terms of training. You say, well, that doesn't make sense because they're only working part-time, so why would you invest as much money? Because the idea was that when a customer was walking the aisles in a Home Depot store, they didn't know if Jacob Morgan was working 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 40 hours a week, or 140 hours a week. And they didn't really care. When they walk up to Jacob Morgan and they ask a question about plumbing or electrical or, garden department, or whatever it may be, I mean, they expected him to have an answer. So, we had to commit the same level of training to Jacob as we would to anybody else. So an example was Nardelli cut the training. So he said, they're part-time people, only give them part-time training. Well, in terms of profitability, immediate profitability, sure, that whatever you saved, but long-term, what you were hurting, and it was very clear that we're hurting it, and we hurt them over a very short period of time, then became extended, is that you hurt the long-term relationship because the customers then could see a different level of service. They didn't understand why that Jacob Morgan suddenly didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. He was in the plumbing department, but he had no answers for anything having to do with plumbing because he wasn't properly trained. So, you could relate that back to our PGA business today, and our golf business is doing incredibly well. It's just running at unbelievable levels. But even if we're short-staffed, we bring in new people to operate on the sales floor. We don't put them on the sales floor until they're properly trained. We would rather ask the existing people on the sales floor, do us a favor for the next couple of weeks. We ask you to work some overtime so we can train these other people before we bring them to the sales floor. So, it's, and that's our core philosophy. We don't want to expose them to customers and have them fitting clubs improperly or balls improperly or clothing improperly or whatever it may be because they're not properly trained. They have to be properly trained. Yeah. Same thing in our stadium today. Nobody gets to interact with any of the people. And there's 5,000 on game day in our stadium. Those 5,000 people, they don't get to interact with any of the people coming into the stadium until they're properly trained. And even if we're short-staffed, we're not putting in properly trained people on the floor, on the floor of a stadium.
So when this happened, so obviously I'm assuming people were a little excited in the short term because they're like, oh my goodness, look at the profits are going up. But then over time, like you said, it started to have a negative impact on Home Depot. And then,
it did. I mean, if you look at the performance of the company after, the first couple of years, I mean, there are all these, there's so many ways in every business, Jacob, and you've been connected to a lot of businesses. There's so many ways you can compromise in virtually any business today and to increase your profitability over a short period of time. But often you do it by you're not just cutting away fat, then you're cutting away the muscle, and eventually you're cutting away the bone. And when you do that, it may not show up immediately, but it shows up soon thereafter. And that's what happened during that period of time is that, decisions were made that they were cut at the core values of our company. And over time, the customers could see the difference and the associates could feel the difference. As Frank Blake, who took over for Nardelli, would say, the beauty of this culture is that, despite all of the I wouldn't send intended efforts, but even the unintended consequences of, short-term thinking and not understanding our values properly, that decision making led to some really bad results and bad customer service, and it was reflected in our volumes, reflected eventually in profitability. The beauty was that the culture was so embedded in so many tens of thousands of people that that culture, the embers never went out. It was always like, you think of your days around a campfire and you go to bed at night and the campfire's roaring. If it's a well-made fire in the morning, you know what? It's still hot, still a hot fire there. So they were able to reignite the culture and bring it back to where it was then, before Nardelli, when Bernie and I were there. And since now, it's at incredible levels as well.
Yeah, I think in the book you say that the first thing that Frank Blake did when he took over was he reached out to you and Bernie.
He did, yeah. He called us. I mean, you stop and think about a guy becoming a CEO, the morning, major company, New York Stock Exchange company. I mean, just a million things, suppliers, associates, things going on, stakeholders, investors. And he called Bernie and myself, and he wanted to get together like that day if we could. And I had lunch with him, and I think Bernie met with him later that day or dinner that night or whatever it may be. And we both, over the time, Frank is retired now, and Craig is there, but I see Craig on a periodic basis. Anything I can do to help the company, I do. In any variety of ways. And they're deeply appreciative of that. Yeah. And Craig, and he acknowledges, he read the book, and he acknowledges that, and one of his comments in the back of the book, that the greatest inheritance he got from the founders was this culture. And this culture is what we talk about in the book, and how it's come to life in all these existing businesses.
So there are a few other particular stories that jumped out at me when I was reading the book. One of them was the Bowater store that you had, and it seemed like there were a lot of managers who didn't change, despite, I read, even somebody taking, like a bulldozer and driving through the manager's offices to tear them down?
Yeah, well, that's I'll tell you a quick version of that. That was one of the mistakes I learned, is that we tried to change. There were 9 stores we acquired. In Dallas and New Orleans and Shreveport and Mobile, Alabama. And so we thought, even though the stores they were about the right size real estate-wise, but they were doing a fraction of the volume that we were doing, probably per store, probably a quarter to a third of the volume we were doing per store. But we didn't want to give up the volume, so we said, let's try to change the stores, change the merchandise mix, change the training, inject our culture into the stores while they were operating. We found out that, one of the things you really can't do is that, and we talk about this in the book at some length, how to avoid this, but, you try to change the tires on a car going even 10 miles an hour. It's a pretty painful experience. So sometimes what you have to do is just stop it, change it, and then go forward. And that's what we eventually did, stop it, this little element of an office, that one of our district managers, to make his point, he got on a forklift, and he was operating the stores in Dallas. It went from store to store to store, and with a forklift one day, he knocked down all of the managers' offices. Because he was making a point, is that we didn't want you in an office. We want you on the floor, talking to the customers, talking to the associates, understanding the business, seeing it. You weren't going to get answers out of a stack of papers sitting on your desk. So
it turns out that I guess you ended up having to let go of the managers because nothing you did would get them to change.
Yeah, well, really, and that's I think another learning that I think, that sometimes, you're trying to change somebody's, core philosophy about culture and what that means and our values, et cetera. Sometimes you can do it and sometimes you can't. And they were so embedded in the way they were doing business that they just couldn't see it any other way. So we basically had to change out all the people over a period of a couple of years.
Okay, so let me jump to one more question then. And this is actually a quote that I really like from Charles Lazarus that you had in the book from Toys R Us. And I just want to read the quote and maybe you can comment on it. And he said, "The hardest moments are when you have to look at a person who who helped you get to 1 billion and realize that person can't help you get to 10 billion.
Yeah.
So for a leader, I mean, what do you do in that situation?
Well, that conversation took place at the conference I think I mentioned earlier that Sam Walton was speaking at, and Charles was offered to take me to lunch, and at that point, Toys R Us was one of the great retailers in the world, and so I went to lunch, and I asked him, well, tell me, we have this fledgling retail company, and what's going to be the biggest challenge? He said, just what you described, Jacob. So what it really means is that it doesn't mean that you get rid of people. It means that you just have to realize what the limitations are. And, we use the succession planning model of the 9-box approach, if you will. Each box is a different description, but essentially they become, if somebody's really good at what they're doing, but they have no capacity for growth, and at some point we all reach our limits, they become what I call a box 3 associates, which means they're excellent at what they're doing, but they've reached it's another version of, what's the expression used to be, when you reach that, that pinnacle and you make another jump and you can't go any further. So whenever you're reaching that point, it means you recognize their limitations, you recognize the values that they have and the value that they can bring to the organization. You keep them in place, you just don't promote them. So it means that their compensation moves, more along with CPI or whatever else, and you appreciate and value what they do, but they may not be somebody you can build on in the future. You may have to look for somebody else who's not only good at what they're doing, but has capacity for growth.
Got it. No, makes a lot of sense. Well, I mean, you've clearly created a remarkable company, even though I know you didn't leave. It was kind of tough, as you talk about in the book, how you ended up leaving.
Yeah.
But it's still, well, maybe you can just share one quick story there and then we'll wrap up. Can you just share how you ended up leaving Home Depot?
Well, I think I had made a decision probably 9 months, maybe a year before, that I had done it for like 22 years, and I love the company, et cetera, but I really felt that I really wanted to do something else. I wasn't exactly sure it was going to be, but I was ready. And Bernie, I think, pretty much felt that way as well. And we had groomed, I don't know, 8-10 people to take our places over the course of the last probably 10 years we were there, and we lost them all. One reason or another, but primarily because they became so wealthy, they lost the eye of the tiger. So that's one downside of becoming so successful. So anyway, I was chairing the succession committee for the board, and that was when we looked at Jamie Dimon, tried to recruit Jamie, hard, worked on that. We had another individual who now is the lead director on the board. His name is Craig Brenneman, who I felt, and actually our associates felt, our management team felt, would have been a great CEO. I think he would have been. He would not have, he would not have made the same mistakes that Bob Nardelli made, because he understood our culture and lived it. But at that point, Jack Welch, Ken was on the GE board. Jack had made it clear there were 3 people in the running to take his place. The 2 that didn't take his place, he was going to release. GE was, a very high performing, one of the highest performing industrial companies in the world under Jack. And so one of the people was, that would let go was Nardelli. And, Ken has like I do, but Ken has a great sense of urgency, and let's get on with it. Let's do it, et cetera, et cetera. And he really, I would say, I don't know what the right word is, but he really, ramrodded, maybe there's another better word for that, Jacob, so your listeners can think of a better word. But, he really pushed through Nardelli without all the processes that we ordinarily would have gone through. And turned out that was a mistake, and, but, Bernie and I have talked about it, a number of times then and since, is that, people would say, well, you should have had somebody in place ready to run it. I said, well, we broke our ass to do that. We had a bunch of people that we felt could do it, and they left because they retired. They had made, millions and millions of dollars, and they just didn't want to, continue to stay in the hunt that way. So I think the importance of succession planning, that is so critical today in companies, particularly if you depend on a cultural philosophy where it's not like just a product being manufactured. You have the best product, you have the best manufacturing gear to produce the product, but in a company that's based on services and cultural beliefs, you're really better off promoting from within, always.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Arthur, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with me. Where can people go to learn more about you or grab your book?
It's being published by Barnes & Noble in the middle of September, and they can pre-order the books now from a variety of places. And I think it's an easy read. I think it's an important read for people that are looking for some real live examples that they can relate to of how to build a culture and in a variety of atmospheres and maintain that in a very holistic way that meets the purpose-filled lives that people are really demanding today.
As somebody who's read the book, I can attest to that. So Arthur, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. You take care of yourself. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks again for tuning into The Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please remember to follow me on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform at futureofworkpodcast.com. And also, don't forget to check out my brand new podcast on entrepreneurship with my wife, Blake, at byobpodcast.com. If you want to reach out to me about sponsoring the show, or if you just have feedback for me, please send me an email, jacob@thefutureorganization.com. And of course, I would love a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred channel is.